Hi, everyone. Great to be with you here. My name is Dane DeCimino, and we're going to dive into a concept here that I'm calling narrative to audience, or you can just call it NTA because we needed another acronym. The main point I'm going to get across here is how narrative to audience is the most powerful weapon that you can have if you're bringing products to market. And I think that product marketers have lost sight of what our true role is, and that is as messengers. And the most important part of messaging is storytelling. It's telling a narrative that convinces an audience to take action. But we've lost sight of that. I think we're too far into the weeds on marketing operations and other areas of the business that we just don't belong in. And we're going to talk about why messaging is a total mess. It's a train wreck. We have to be honest about that. And then the final part of this presentation, where I'll spend most of our time here, is on why narrative to audience is the new way forward. So let's kick this off with the fact that PMMs are messengers, period. Okay. So let's touch on the messy state of product marketing today. There's a lot going on across our role, and it's really a lot to juggle for all of us that do this on a day-to-day basis. But there's a few buckets that I put these challenges in. The first, the Matthew McConaughey, is how we look, in my opinion, in this scene from Wolf of Wall Street, where he's talking about everything's fairy dust. It kind of looks like us when we speak to product management or engineering. This is how we look when we're talking about messaging, because we're not really talking technically or about into the weeds of the product. And the second challenge I think that we have is that we're treated like flex tape on the marketing side. So the CMO thinks about product marketing, and they think about us as somebody that can solve any problem that we come across. And it has made us spread thin in terms of skill sets. And then the third problem is that AI has really impacted both the products that we're bringing to market and our role, right? It's not just that all of the products we're selling now have AI baked into them. It's that we have to use AI assistants and agents to be more productive. And so it's a really complex time to be bringing technologies to market. And there's more competition than ever because of AI as well. But most importantly, we forgot our role, and that is as messengers. So here's what happens when we forget we're messengers. I once worked at a company called Komodo. This was like 13 years ago. We sold what's called SSL certificates, secure socket layer. This is about encryption. And I was on the inside sales team. That was my first role in cybersecurity. And I was tasked to make 120 calls a day with a headset on. And over the course of like 3 to 4 months, I started hearing ringing sounds in my ears. It was just a very unsustainable job for me. And deep down, I came from marketing and I knew that's where I wanted to go. And so I talked to the CEO, I emailed him, and to his credit, he emailed me back and he opened up a role in the marketing team for me after I made my case. But once I joined the marketing team, I just did whatever I was asked to do. I fixed that dialer system I just talked about. I was designing products. I was using Adobe InDesign to design brochures. This wasn't like your textbook product marketer role. I was just doing every odd job you can find, and I was useful in that way, but I was more like a handyman walking around with a tool belt than I was as a very specified profession like an electrician that has higher value overall to the business, right? And so later I learned my nickname became DDI. And one day he came out of his office, the CEO, and he goes, DDI. And he called me Dane Does It from that day forward because I would just do whatever I was asked. So this is where things can spiral to if you don't have a very clear definition of your role and you just do everything. By the way, that was a really fun job. I learned a lot. It was like an MBA of sorts, but I did have to leave. And when I did, I went to a company called Optiv and actually relocated to Denver and worked at this really official company where there was an office setting that was more calm. It was more professional. Everybody seemed to have their act together. And so I thought, oh, wow, I really have to learn true product marketing and what the role should be. And so I enrolled in this course called Pragmatic Marketing. I'm sure you all are aware of what that is. Now, I'm not bashing. They're a great organization that have done a lot of good, but also we all have to admit that this framework causes a lot of anxiety because we look at all of these boxes and we think, oh, I have to handle all of these things. And I remember I took it to the extreme. I built a spreadsheet and labeled all of the different functional areas with all of these boxes. And I tried listing a couple of tasks each for the solution that I was in charge of. And what happened? I ended up burning out again. So on the one side, you have no definition of role, you burn out. On the other side, you over engineer the product marketing role and you burn out as well. Just ask Hide the Pain Harold, who just turned 28 there. Okay. So after 13 years of going through a lot of heartburn in the cybersecurity industry, but just technology in general, I've worked for 7 different vendors, 100+ projects easily. And I was invited to present at Cyber Marketing Con, and I wanted to just reflect on my experience. And I created this slide because I was thinking about all the different projects I went through and what was the function that I really delivered? What was my true value to all of these businesses? I had to think about it, but it was really about my ability to bring a message to an audience. In every case, whether it was a rapid response, I was involved with SolarWinds, WannaCry, Heartbleed, to name a few of the rapid response efforts, and gathering messaging and what do we say and how do we approach that process. That's bringing a message to an audience that needs to hear it. Bringing Optive's managed services business to market, right? Working with a firm called Force Management, we would kick off an entire sales force of 300, 400 sellers. And that was our audience. It was an internal audience, but still, we had to bring the official solution messaging, and they provided really good templates that we filled and delivered on stage. And that was all about bringing a message to that audience. Working at VMware. After Pat Gelsinger left, I was working there and was tasked with supporting the VM world keynotes, bringing our security operations technologies onto our web presence. And it was all about message to an audience. Splunk, where I've been for the past 4 years. Every portfolio messaging or keynote messaging project, same thing. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but just same thing across every company and every project I've worked in. It was all about bringing a message to an audience at the end of the day. It wasn't about sitting in a spreadsheet, calculating things. It was always about messaging, and it still is. So it made me think, like, how can I make this a little more interactive? And so I built this game last year called the PMM OS Final Four, right? So if you were to design a product marketing app and you had 4 modules to create, what would those 4 modules be? And the 4 I landed on were strategist, messenger, innovator, and creator, okay? I think all of our activities can be boiled into these 4 areas. There's this movie called Highlander, I think it's called, where there's this like competition between all of these final warriors, and there can be only one. The movie always says there can be only one. So if you think about product marketing, we're getting to the point where, yes, we're becoming more full stack and being asked to do more with AI agents. And so it is quite possible that our role spans across all 4 of these modules, and we become like full stack product marketers unless teams become smaller and smaller. That's where I believe we're heading. However, I think that messaging is still the primary feeder into the other 3. If you think about strategist, innovator, and creator, they all depend on solid messaging in order to operate, right? So if I had to pick one of these modules, it would be messenger. And I think I built this out. So the problem with strategist and why that loses to messenger is it's too hard to define what success looks like. If you think about, how do you know if you deeply understand customers, products, and markets? How do you know if your strategy, and that's one of those words, it's like strategy, what does that even mean? And so I put lost code too fluffy there. And then if you took innovator versus creator, the fact is that creative tasks are more and more being outsourced to AI, and it's getting easier. It's not totally easy, and I love brand and creative teams. But the fact is that at the push of a button, if you take messaging, we're getting to the point where videos, decks, images, all of that can be created if you have the proper messaging in place with AI or even with an agency or another team or another person in the company. That's not really a product marketing. You're not going to hire somebody for a product marketing role and expect them to create content yet. I think we're going to get there, but it's not there yet. All right, so it's messenger versus innovator. No surprise here. Messenger wins this to me because with innovator, yes, launches are very important. Bringing technologies to market is massively important. But when it comes down to it, to do that, those tasks come back to messaging. And the other reality is that PMs are starting to go direct more and more. Just like product marketers are becoming full stack, product managers are also becoming full stack and owning more and more in the GTM process. So they'll think to themselves, well, why am I going to join 15 calls with product marketing when all I have to do is take my product, spin up ChatGPT, and start pumping out messaging based on a prescribed template? It's happening more and more. That's why hiring is not expected to explode in the AI era, because it's like, well, why are you going to hire someone? Just use an agent for that. Messenger, to me, is the leading module and the winner of this game. So let's talk about the reality of messaging. I call it mess aging because it's a total mess and then you start aging. So it's a messy reality, and we're going to talk about why. If you look at messaging for a single product, it's down there in the bottom left of this graph. It's pretty low pain, pretty low complexity. Now, if you're a new product marketer just starting out in your career, it's still a lot. But this is what I've noticed is that if you do a really good job with one product, you'll often inherit another one, especially if you're with a bigger company. If you only have one product in the company, forget that. Most companies have a portfolio of products. So that span of control will expand. And so if you inherit or earn a portfolio messaging role, it's the complexity and pain goes up, right? Because you have to understand that most products have their own segments and competitors within those segments that they deal with. And so layers of complexity build when you add more products to manage. And it's harder to integrate different messages from different products into a single portfolio message. However, it's not just one portfolio. Often in larger companies, even mid-sized companies, you'll have a portfolio A, a portfolio B, and C, D, E. There's different portfolios. For the most part, you'll have 2, 3, 4 portfolios within a company, and they might not talk to each other. So then there's somebody that's needed that puts on a messenger hat that can integrate the messaging across portfolios. So that's often called cross-portfolio messaging. And so the pain goes really high and the complexity gets really intense because it's more markets, more technologies, more personas. You're dealing with a lot. It's more cadence calls. It's more threads. It's a lot of communication. We're going to get into why it's not as hard as you might think. And then in some cases, you might be acquired by a company that has a cross-portfolio message of multiple portfolios. So you can imagine the maddening complexity of bringing those two portfolios of cross-portfolio messages together. And then you have a cross-portfolio message of cross-portfolio messages. And that's why I put this meme here, is because when I talk about this, I often look like this guy in this meme here. So it does get very complex. The pain is real for messaging today. Now, the fact is, though, even when you perfect and pump out a messaging brief that handles everything, within an hour, it's outdated. It's like when you buy a new car, you get off the lot, all of a sudden the value starts going down. The second you publish a messaging brief, the value starts going down. Why is that? Because it's static. Markets don't stop moving. It's like a river. I don't want to get too philosophical here, but there's this saying, you can't step in the same river twice. And that's what it's like with messaging. Once you publish your messaging brief, the markets have shifted. An acquisition happened that day, and then it changes the landscape of the market you're working in. And so that's the reality. And by the way, I took this picture. I'm really into fly fishing in Colorado, and this is from one of my favorite places in the world here called Cheeseman Canyon in Colorado. And I get a lot of time to think out there about messaging, of all things. To be successful with messaging, the old guard will tell you that you have to build a messaging brief. That's the way it's supposed to be done. And it makes sense. How are you going to survive without some type of documentation? You have to have them. And I still build them. Everybody has that responsibility as a product marketer. It's our core deliverable. If you fill this out and cross every T, dot every I, there's a template that you can use, and it's pretty cookie cutter. You have basically, there's these 10 elements that you need in every messaging brief. There might be more, you might go with less, but what I've discovered is that these are the 10 that I land on. The tagline is often the most important because that would be like at your trade show, what is that top line message? And then you have your 10 word, 25 word, 50 word, 100 word descriptions for different teams to use on website, event properties, et cetera. Your positioning statement, that's who do you serve, what problem you solve, your top 3 challenges that you're solving, the customer pain points, the 3 value pillars that align to those challenges. If you go to any professional website, you'll see that most landing pages will have 3 blades. That's where these blades come from, is that the 3 value pillars and the message headers that you develop here. Then you have your proof points. How does data metrics back these value points? And then use cases, customer quotes, analyst validation, continuous improvement. Now, when you go through this message development process, it's not easy because you don't just write a messaging brief on your own and then publish it, unless you're at a startup or you're a founder and you're the only employee. I mean, I understand that. But for the most part, product marketers and companies of any size, they have to get support for the messaging, and it becomes very painful because it's a messaging by committee process. You have to create the V1, share it around, internal groups give feedback, you update it, schedule analyst briefings, get feedback, update it, do user tests, which frankly, if I looked at the first phase of my career, I entirely skipped user testing, never even considered it, which is a terrible mistake that you should avoid. And a lot of PMMs don't even do this. Test your messaging with users. And there's tools you can do this with, like Winter or other tools, because without user feedback, how do you know it resonates at all? And then once you get the user feedback, update again, create final draft for sign off, and then you have to get executive sign off. And if you're a publicly traded company, there's realities that you have to face there, and then publish externally after legal reviews. I mean, this is an intense process. It's not just creating messaging and then that's it. And during that, you have the actual stakeholder feedback. I use this meme from The Office because it reminds me of Dwight and Jim. The PMM is Jim, and your feedback crew is like Dwight, who just tell you how it is, because most think that they understand messaging more than they do. So when you send out the messaging, you'll find that people that you share it with become like PhDs in it. Let's just go through a few of the core groups that you ask for feedback. First is your PMM team. Those are your buddies internally, and they'll tell you it's great, but they have their own messaging problems to deal with, and so they're not going to spend a lot of time with it. You have your PM, your product managers that you work closely with. They're also extremely busy, so they probably don't even open it, and they don't think messaging is really important. That's my experience. Or if they do review it, they'll just say, too many buzzwords, it's too fluffy. Executives will often ask for a buzzword to be inserted or a customer quote, like, let's make sure we get a customer, and both of which are never easy to do. Everybody knocks buzzwords. I challenge anyone to build a message without at least 1 or 2 buzzwords. It's just impossible. Almost every word can be put in that category because they're usually just accurately describing, and then everybody starts using it. And it's also never easy to get a customer quote. That takes time and effort. It could take up to 2 months just to get a customer sign off with their PR team, depending on their size. Then you have analyst relations. Without fail, you will have data that you're using that you're not supposed to in your messaging. You'll say 47% of all teams don't have enough skills in this area. That's where our solution comes in. And then the AR team, analyst relations, who's in charge of making sure there's good relationship with the analyst firms, will say, did you get approval from the analyst firm to use those numbers? And we never do, right? Because we were so busy just building the messaging, and we want to see if it sticks first. And then SEs, they're solutions engineers, sales engineers. They're usually highly technical and also very blunt people in my experience. And so they'll just tear it to shreds. And it's very good. It's a necessary part of the process, but be ready for that pain. And then finally, actual analyst briefings. The analysts will, in front of your peers, beat you while you're down. They enjoy tearing apart messaging as you sit there in front of your boss and present it. It's a known fact. And then my recommendation is just, in the best you can do in Jim Halpert's voice, just say, that's great feedback, thanks, when they do that. This meme that's playing here, I built for Cyber PMM, which is a newsletter that I publish to, is from Goodwill Hunting. And if you remember that scene where Matt Damon sits with Robin Williams for the first time, and then he just absolutely shreds apart his little painting in the back and like diagnoses or analyzes his whole entire life story and tears it apart. That's what messaging feedback is like. The process is like you just poured everything into building this messaging brief and you send it out, and then you get a Matt Damon that just tears it to shreds and tells you didn't refer to brand's guidelines. And then that's when you lose your mind, right? I have gone through this process that I just described at length. The result was a 4-month process where I built a messaging brief that was 16 pages long. I included up to 35 stakeholders, briefed 4 analyst firms, and tested with 300 users. So I've seen portfolio messaging by committee. I've seen the most complex messaging situations that you can think of. And that's when I think I created this meme, which made me realize, what are we doing here, right? We're overestimating the importance of these messaging briefs. And I thought about it, and it was almost like we're signing off on the Declaration of Independence or pushing it through these committees of people to get sign off and feedback and approval, and spending way too much time on that process. And I thought it was pretty funny because for me, my personal breaking point, it's like I can handle all that feedback, but when the brand team tells me I have to remove an Oxford comma, that's when I lose it. And it's funny to me, if you look at the guy in the background here, nobody notices him, but he's standing in the back observing the 3 founding fathers there. And he's the product manager just saying, they do know the product won't ship for another 6 months, right? And so that's another reality, is that by the time we finish messaging, the product situation has changed. So we go through that long process, and then, and I don't want to sound too cynical here, but I'm just describing the problems that we face. These are very real challenges. Anybody that's gone through this will start probably chuckling and understanding. So after that story I just told you about 4 months, 16 pages, the next challenge was, okay, now you have to go to, for me, it was the RSA conference, which is the largest industry event in cybersecurity. And I have to pitch it in 10 minutes to 15 people that aren't even in the target persona. And so we're giving these presentations all over the industry. And we have to distill it down into these very rapid fire presentations where there's this very noisy and chaotic environment. So that 16-page brief, you can throw it out the window. It just does not work. It does not work. You have to get your messaging so stupidly simple that you can enter these events. And anytime somebody asks you to stand on a stage, no matter how noisy and loud it is, grab an audience's attention with some very core storytelling basics, which we're going to get into in a minute. And we're not doing that today. And often we're putting our audiences to sleep by telling facts about our products, listing the percentages, and we call it speeds and feeds about our products, and it just doesn't work. Oh, and then finally, Hide the Pain Harold here says, just repeat annually and you're all set. So that's the final fact that I'll say is the painful reality is that once you finish that process, it's almost time to repeat the annual cycle of refreshing that messaging document. So the pain is real. Now, what's the new way here? Because obviously we have to change things. There's got to be a new way. And I call it narrative to audience, because I think as messengers, we forgot about 2 key things over the past decade, maybe 2 decades, as this profession has grown. The first is that people forget facts, but they remember stories. There's an author, a genius on mythology and narratives. His name is Joseph Campbell, and he wrote a very famous book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And in that, he describes a process called the hero's journey, which is that circle there. His point was that every story follows the same process. And you ever hear the saying, comes full circle, or we went full circle? I mean, that's where that comes from. Every story is the full circle. A hero is called to adventure. They decline. Then the mentor shows up and encourages them out. Think about Star Wars, Lord of the Rings. Remember, Bilbo says, "No, I'm not. There's no way I'm going." When the dwarves are in his house, and then he tells Gandalf, "Sorry, I can't." That was the call to adventure, and he declines. And then he runs and catches up with them and goes, but then he has to fight the dragons. So every story follows that same process. So storytelling is the most powerful way to put ideas in the world. That's Robert McKee, another famous storytelling author. So that's the first thing we've forgotten about is narrative. The second thing is audience. So Peter Drucker is one of the all-time great management gurus, and I learned a lot from him by reading his quotes. I have a book called The Daily Drucker. He has all these quotes about business. And when he comes to marketing, he said, the aim of marketing is to know the customer so well that the product sells itself. Tell me that's not product marketing in a nutshell. What have we done though? Product marketers, in my opinion, have become so disconnected from the customer pain points and realities over the years, whether that's through internal separation, like this V, where we started understanding that, and then over the years, we got lost and became disconnected from where customers were. No communication with customers, not understanding their needs, and it's become a real problem, and it impacts the quality of our messaging. Because how can we tell a story to an audience if we don't know anything about that audience? There's this thought leader named Val Tsenev, and he analyzed 1,000 security vendor websites. He found that 97% were saying their technology was the hero. And I do this still, make this mistake. I'll start my messaging by talking about how great our product is. And every company does this. You go to their web pages, it's like, we are the best, we're great, we're the hero. The problem is that we have to, in every story, realize that the customer is the hero of the story. And that's borrowing from a book called Building a Story Brand, where he talks a lot about this. Very essential book to read to understand these dynamics. So we forgot about narrative and audience. So if you're asking what is a narrative, I just want to clarify real quick. It's actually a story, but it conveys a message. So it's not just a story because that's just what happened. It's like, why did that story matter? So if I watch the movie Rocky and the next day say, my buddy calls me and he's like, "Oh, what'd you do last night?" And I say, "Oh, I just watched this movie called Rocky." And he says, "Oh, cool. What was it about?" If I said, "Oh, it was just some movie, just some boxing movie based in Philadelphia," is that going to inspire him to go watch it? No, it sounds boring. I mean, there's no emotion, there's no connection. But if I talk about it as what the story meant to me, I really was impacted by that movie. It was all about perseverance, determination, made me think I have to be more courageous to keep moving forward, no matter how hard life hits me. He'll hear the emotion in my voice and he'll understand, this sounds like a really good movie. I should probably check that out. I could use a little inspiration right now. That's what a narrative does. It's a story that conveys a message. So how do you do that? All right, let's get to the point where you can use narrative building techniques, narrative generation techniques. So instead of that circle, and you can go ahead and get that book, read it, do the circle. You can go to ChatGPT right now and ask for support in understanding these things. Or you could take a screenshot of this and drop it into your LLM of choice. But I've distilled it. This is my opinion, but based on the prior work from Joseph Campbell, there's 5 steps to any good story. The first is the call to adventure. From a product perspective, it's the customer world shift. Why change? What is demanding a step in a new direction? What is the big new problem that needs to be solved by your target audience? The second is the quest. Oh, and by the way, the pictures here do resemble these phases by using The Hobbit, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. So we already discussed the call to adventure, how Gandalf went to Bilbo's home and called him to adventure. Next is the quest. This is where you have to face the dragon. In Bilbo's case, it was the spider, the dragon, or a whole other set of problems, goblins and orcs. So you're not just going to succeed in step 2. You have to encounter friction, challenges, and limits. Any good story has friction, has limits and challenges and pain. And those have to be addressed in any good story. The guide is there to help you get through the quest. It's like Gandalf comes in and it's like, no, turn left. Remember, this is from Lord of the Rings when Frodo's like, which way, Gandalf? Left or right? Mordor. Which way is it? And he's like, turn left. The point here is the most important thing you can understand is that you're Gandalf. You're not Bilbo. Okay. For a long time, I thought my product was Bilbo. And I would paint this great picture of how amazing the product is. The problem is your product needs to guide the hero. Okay. And once you understand that, it transforms the way you go about your profession as a product marketer or a messenger. And then comes the transformation. Now that the hero has listened to the guide, he's transformed. He succeeds. He adopts a new strength and new capability and overcomes the challenges that we described earlier. And then finally, what's the lasting value? The promised future, the new reality that the hero steps into. What does that look like? You have to paint that vision ahead of time. So that's any good story for products in a nutshell. If you like frameworks, I built this NTA Fish, which is the narrative to audience framework. So from left to right, you have a narrative trigger. So you have a keynote coming up, a vision, a tier 1 launch, or a new market you're entering. Okay, we need a narrative. Throw away the idea of building a 16-page messaging brief. Keep it to 1 page. I say 1 page because it has to be stupidly simple. And you can use AI these days to make this very rapidly produced, but it has to have those 5 elements. And I think if you have 5 sections on 1 page, and each of those sections is 50 words, so it's called a 5 by 50 framework. 1 page, 5 sections, 50 words each. And the titles are right there. Why change? Today's reality, new way, new capabilities, new reality. Just structure it that way. Keep it very simple so that you remember this story, right? And so that everybody can remember it and you can tell it and you can on demand be able to tell that story. And then, of course, you have to test it with your audience, right? And so this is where message testing tools come in. Like I said, Winter, they do this. If you don't have a budget for message testing, you can simulate with AI tests. You can say, all right, this is your role. I want you to act like 50 of this persona and provide brutal feedback and tear apart this messaging and help me improve. You can set up these simulations with AI these days. So that's the testing phase. Once you refresh the story based on the tests and the outcomes of that, publish. And that's when you notify team leads or agents or whoever you're working with that the messaging is ready to go. And then those leads or agents or yourself will distribute to your audience across all channels. That's when you hit publish in all the formats that your channels need. So if it's an event, if it's a webinar, if it's a white paper, if it's this or that, it's the same message being distributed to all those different channels, okay? And all of this is tied together with a vision for your organization, your company, your product. You have to have a vision. That's the thread that ties all of these steps together and make sure you don't go off the rails. So what this gives you, this NTA Fish, is an actual pragmatic framework. Distribution becomes a very simple process because the creation of these assets and socials and copy and booth messaging, decks, web pages, auto replies, training, whatever you're building, you can now use AI with a core message and say, create this, right? Within minutes. So very central to this idea of narrative to audience is what's called a team of teams by General Stanley McChrystal, who knows a lot about bringing together different teams for a common mission, because he did this in the military context where he had to work with SEALs, CIA, DIA, NSA, logistics companies, like all these different elements had to come together. But for us as messengers, it might be your content team, your marketing operations team, your demand gen team, or whatever those teams that you work with are. Your job, our job, is to provide the shared narrative that all of these teams connect through and pull from and operate from. The ultimate objective is to remove yourself as a bottleneck to every decision, to every phone call, to every Slack thread, and enable with a core narrative that makes sense after all the work you just did. That's your job. Once you do that, your job is done. All the other teams and agents or whoever that you're working with or agencies can now operate efficiently, effectively, and accurately toward an audience that you're trying to capture. So what's the destination here? It's the shared narrative like we just talked about. And what does this result in? First of all, the main benefit, you don't have to maintain a 16-pager anymore or spend 4 months getting committee approvals. Dan Martell is a business owner, an entrepreneur, an influencer. And one of the things he talks about is buy back your time. He has a book on it. And he'll say, you can't scale without a narrative, a shared narrative. You just can't. You're going to be all over the place. The third thing is AI baselining. So don't deviate from this core message is what you instruct your agents. So you have to have that. 4 here is the piranha deflector. So these are all the little requests that come at you. Hey, Dane, can you provide me with a blurb for this regional event in Louisiana that's happening next week? Those are like little piranha bytes that you can receive, and you might get 20 to 30 inbound requests like that a week. But with a shared narrative, you're not going to get rid of all of them, but you will be able to reduce by saying, oh yeah, here, just pull from this. Keynotes. So when it's time for your executives or you're the executive or founder, this gives you the same narrative that you can distribute. I saw a really good example of this recently. Tony Robbins, who is a master at this. He went on a podcast tour recently. If you go to YouTube, type in Tony Robbins, you'll see he probably just did about 15 podcasts with the top podcasts in the world. His audience is so big that, of course, he gets the spot. Do you think he changed what he said on each one? No, I mean, he related differently, but it was the same message. He had the same message across, which ultimately was prior to his free event that he gave, and he had 1 to 2 million people sign up for this event. So he understands this. He had the same narrative, but depending on how the interviewer asked questions, he would bring up different parts of it. It was a masterclass in narrative to audience. Final thing, if you work with agencies, you can give them these types of briefs to really make them more effective. It's the same concept as AI baselining. It's like agency baselining. All right, so that's it. Last thing I'll remind you of, start with the end in mind. Shared narrative is the end game. This changes the game. So taking a narrative to an audience instead of 16-page briefs changes everything. Number 3 here, progress over perfection. Don't get stuck trying to make things perfect and trying to please these committees of people that you work with. And then less is more. When you get to the point of accepting that this is the most valuable thing you can do, you reduce your scope. And the idea that you control more than you do is gone. Because if you do this well, everything else will fall in place. I hope you enjoyed this. I will ask for one thing from you, and that is try out gnarly.ai. This is a narrative to audience platform where everything we just talked about is coded into an app that's free to use. I want to hear how your experience goes. If you are willing to provide that type of feedback, then I will set you up with a pro account so that you can, get full access to the entire app. All I ask is for your input and to send me what your thoughts are about it. And Cyber PMM is now an app on the Gnarly platform. So when you log in, there will be a drop down and you can get training, content, take your narrative built in Gnarly to your audience with Cyber PMM. So thank you so much for your time. Look forward to hearing from you soon.